He's just having a hard time getting back. That's all there is to it. I talk to him all the time and let him know that everyone misses him." Dave Mustaine got drunk at the studio in 1986 and broke a handmade guitar that was worth a lot of money. The next events cost a record company a lot of money, ended a friendship in the metal community for good, and made his fellow musicians swear they'd rather open for a house band than work with Mustaine again. This is the story that no one has told about why Araya and other metal stars wouldn't work with Dave Mustaine, from studio meltdowns to revenge solos. His birthday is September 13, 1961, and he was born in La Mesa, California. His full name was David Scott Mustaine, and he had a rough youth. Mustaine found solace in music as a child in a broken home with a drunken father who abused him. He started playing in local bands when he was 17 years old and taught himself guitar skills that would later define thrash metal. It was clear that he was talented even when he was a teenager. He played the guitar so quickly and accurately that it stopped and stared other young musicians. Mustaine didn't always pay attention to school, but music did. He learned how to play the guitar by watching hard rock players like Jimmy Page and Ritchie Blackmore for hours on end. By the time he was in his late teens, he had developed a unique way of playing that included lightning-fast alternate picking and difficult, angry riffs. The nu metal scene in California would soon notice how good they were at their craft. His life changed when he joined a new band called Metallica in 1981. In order to find a lead guitarist, Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield put an ad in a neighborhood paper. Mustaine came to the event with just his guitar and no speaker. Legend has it that he plugged into Hetfield's amp, played a series of licks that silenced the room, and was then asked to join the band right away. During his time with Metallica, Mustaine co-wrote a number of metal hits, such as The Four Horsemen, which was first called The Mechanics, Jump in the Fire, and parts of Metal Militia. His tough attitude and aggressive playing style helped shape Metallica's early sound, moving them toward what would become known as thrash metal. His time with Metallica, on the other hand, was unstable and short. His problems with drugs and booze, along with the fact that he was often rude, caused problems in the band. In April 1983, Metallica was in New York getting ready to make their first album, Kill 'Em All. This was the breaking point. Because of a series of events, including a fight with Hetfield, Mustaine was fired from the band. One morning, they woke him up, gave him a bus ticket back to California, and told him they no longer needed his help. Mustaine was angry about being fired and set out to make something better than the music his old partners had made. Metal fans told stories about the bus ride from New York to California. Mustaine is said to have started making plans for a new band that would play music even faster and more technically advanced than Metallica while they were on this trip. By the end of 1983, Mustaine and drummer David Ellefson had formed Megadeth. The name came from the military word Megadeth, which means 1 million deaths by nuclear explosion. Mustaine made it clear from the start that Megadeth wasn't just another metal band, but a way for him to get back at Metallica. He was born on June 6, 1961 in Vina del Mar, Chile. Araya had his own way of becoming a metal star. When he was 5 years old, his family moved to Southgate, California, and started living in the United States. Araya, unlike Mustaine, came from a healthy family that worked hard. His dad worked at a plant that tanned leather. Both parents stressed how important it was to go to school and work hard. Araya got into music through his older brother Tom, who played guitar and told him about bands like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. Araya first learned to play bass to play with his brother, but he quickly became hooked on heavy music. Araya formed Slayer with Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman in 1981 while still working as a respiratory therapist, a job he kept even during the early years of the band. By 1986, Megadeth and Slayer had both become well known as leaders in the thrash metal genre. Rick Rubin produced Slayer's album Rain and Blood, which changed the genre with its speed and energy that had never been seen before. Megadeth had already released Peace Cells, but Who's Buying, which showed off Mustaine's songwriting and technical ability. The thrash music scene was competitive, but people also worked together. Bands often played together, affected each other's music, and stayed friends even though they were competitors in the music business. This sense of community led to talks about how different thrash bands could work together, such as the thought of Slayer and Megadeth working together on a split release or a joint tour. Def Jam, the label of Slayer, and Combat Records, the label of Megadeth, set up a meeting at a Los Angeles recording studio in late 1986. It was a big idea for the two bands to work together on a split EP with new songs from each, followed by a co-headlining tour across North America. This would have been the best thrash experience ever for fans. For the labels, it meant a lot of possibility for making money. The meeting was set to start at noon on Wednesday. Araya, Kerry King, Jeff Hanneman, and Dave Lombardo from Slayer showed up on time, as did the people from the record company and the studio techs. Ellefson from Megadeth also showed up on time and apologized, saying that Mustaine was on his way. Hours went by. There were no answers to the calls. Even though Slayer's music is aggressive, the band's members are known for being professional. At first they waited calmly, but as the time went on, they became more and more irritated. It cost a lot to use the studio, and time was running out. It was clear right away that Mustaine was drunk when he finally showed up, just after 4 p.m. Several people who were there say that he walked into the control room by accident, cut off Araya and a producer in the middle of a talk, and then started ranting about how Slayer's production sound on Rain and Blood. You could feel the stress in the room. King replied with a comment about Megadeth's recent shows. He is known for being honest. People who were there say King said something like, "At least we can play our songs live without messing them up." This comment, which seemed unrelated, really upset Mustaine. In the metal world, what happened next is famous. When Mustaine saw Kerry King's handmade BC Rich Warlock guitar, a unique instrument with a jacked-up body that had become King's signature style, it wasn't just any guitar. The piece was worth several $1,000s because it was specially made for King's playing style. In an angry moment, Mustaine yanked the guitar off its stand, yelled something that witnesses later couldn't agree on what it said, and hit the guitar hard against an amplifier nearby. The neck broke, the body broke into bits, and the guitar parts were all over the studio floor. The room went quiet, besides the sound of the broken guitar parts hitting the ground. Then chaos broke out. King charged at Mustaine, but Lombardo and Hanneman stopped him. Since Araya is usually the calmest member of Slayer, she stepped in between them to try to calm things down. Ellefson felt bad about his bandmates' actions and tried to say sorry, but the damage to the guitar and the chance of working together again was too great to fix. Label officials ended the meeting quickly and escorted a still angry King out of the room. Araya stayed behind to figure out what was going on. Araya talked about what happened in an interview in 2010 that has become famous among metal fans. It wasn't even about the guitar, even though Kerry was very angry about it for a long time. Instruments can be changed. Being rude to Kerry, the people who set up the meeting, and the fans who would have loved what we could have made together was what hurt them most. That was the problem that couldn't be fixed. After the event, there were quick and far-reaching effects. The planned work together was canceled right away. Combat Records thought about going to court against Mustaine for putting the deal at risk, but chose not to because they were afraid of the bad press that would come from it. Rick Rubin of Def Jam, who had pushed for the collaboration, was allegedly so upset that he vowed never to work with Megadeth again. It had a big effect on the money. Insiders in the music business thought that the canceled tour and partnership could have cost the company $2.00 to $3 million, which was a lot of money in the mid-1980 SS. The damage to Megadeth's image in the close-knit metal community was worse. The music business heard about what happened very quickly. Other bands were afraid to share bills with Megadeth because they thought they would act in the same crazy way. Promoters were worried about how reliable shows would be. So when Megadeth was booked, they sometimes asked for extra guarantees or payments. For Slayer, the event made their relationships with other thrash acts stronger. Araya, King, Hanuman, and Lombardo were very close with members of Exodus, Metallica, and Anthrax. Later, these connections would make it easier for bands to work together on projects like the Clash of the Titans tour in 1990 and 1991, though Megadeth was noticeably absent from the European part of the tour. In the late 1980s, Mustaine had a reputation for being hard to work with. Even though Megadeth's records, like So Far So Good and Rust in Peace 1990, were becoming more popular, many people in the business stayed away. Megadeth was very different from other thrash bands. This was most clear in 1991 when Slayer, Anthrax, and Metallica went on a famous tour called Clash of the Titans. Megadeth was finally added to the North American leg of the tour, but it was said that the bands didn't talk to each other much and were tense during the shows. In 1991, a metal magazine quoted Kerry King as saying, This quote went around a lot, making people even more sure of how they saw the fight. Even though the business disagreement was big, Mustaine and members of Slayer were still fighting on a personal level behind the scenes. In the 1990s, both acts played at a number of festivals, but they were always on different days or at opposite ends of the venue. When they did meet backstage, it was said that their exchanges were cold and short. Even though Araya didn't talk about the fight as much in public as King did, he kept his distance from Mustaine. When he did talk about it in interviews, which were very rare, he usually stuck to the professional side of things instead of making personal attacks. He said that the fact that they had different ideas about music and professionalism made it hard for them to work together. At the same time, Mustaine was going through his own problems. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, his problems with addiction got worse. His behavior became more and more unpredictable, which hurt Megadeth's shows and the way they worked together. Megadeth had more lineup changes than almost any other big thrash band. Band members came and went. That could have been the end of the story. Another rock and roll feud that would have been forgotten if both sides hadn't changed over the next few decades. By the middle of the 1000s, 990 thrash metals that both bands had grown up in was changing. Grunge had changed the music business, and many metal bands were changing the way they sounded to fit the new style. Slayer stuck to a pretty consistent style, while Megadeth tried to make their music more radio-friendly, with records like Euthanasia, 1994, and Countdown to Extinction, 1992. In 2002, Mustaine's life took a big turn when he hurt his arm and thought he might never be able to play guitar again. During his time in rehab, he changed as a person, becoming sober and becoming a Christian. Along with this change in living, he gained a new understanding of the problems and actions he had done in the past. Araya, on the other hand, had his own problem. Years of hitting his head and performing hard had worn him down, and in 2010 he had to have surgery on his neck. This physical loss made him think about his life and work, including fights he had in the metal community in the past. The Cold War between Slayer and Megadeth started to warm up around the middle of the 2000s. At the Download Festival in England in 2004, members of both bands were seen talking briefly behind the scenes. It was the first polite conversation that was written down in almost 20 years. Even though it wasn't a final peace agreement, it showed that the anger had lessened. In 2010, bigger things happened. Plans were made for a run of concerts with Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax. These were called the Big Four, the four bands that many people say created and popularized thrash metal. For the sake of metal history, everyone had to put aside their differences for this first-of-its-kind cooperation. Because of the well-known bad blood between Mustaine and his former Metallica teammates, as well as Slayer, fans thought it would be impossible to see all four bands on the same bill. Still, the shows went on, first in Europe and then in the US, with the most famous show happening at Yankee Stadium in New York. Behind the scenes, things are still businesslike and not friendly. Video from the events shows that Mustaine and members of Slayer didn't talk to each other much, with Araya in particular keeping a polite but distant attitude. In any case, the fact that these shows happened was a big change from the 1986 episode with the guitar smashing. In the years that followed, both Araya and Mustaine talked about their long-running fight in different talks. In 2018, Araya talked about Mustaine and admitted that, while they would never be close friends, he had grown to respect Mustaine's hard work and obvious contributions to metal music. Araya said, "We were all young and had our problems. Just so you know, Dave's was busier. We all made something special for the fans in the end." That's important. In his 2010 book, Mustaine, a heavy metal memoir, and in many interviews, Mustaine has admitted to his past behavior. He says that a lot of it was because he was struggling with addiction. He told Rolling Stone in 2016, "I've burned a lot of bridges. Some have been fixed up, but I'm okay with the fact that others probably never will be." The fight between Slayer and Megadeth is about more than just two people who don't get along. It shows how unstable and high stakes the metal scene was in the 1980s, when young artists were suddenly hit with fame, money, and power they weren't always ready to handle. For Araya, the event and what happened after it made his already strong professional standards even stronger. Even though Slayer's music and image are very strong, they have always had a reputation for being reliable and professional. Even after Slayer became famous, Araya kept working as a respiratory therapist. This helped him stay grounded in a way that many rock stars didn't. The story of Mustaine shows a different side of the music business, the chance to change and grow. He changed over time from a bitter, angry guitarist who was out to beat his old bandmates to a more thoughtful person who could admit his mistakes and still be proud of his musical impact. When Slayer announced their retirement and last tour in 2019, rumors started to spread that they might finally get along with Megadeth or work together again. It never happened in a formal way, but there were rumors that Araya and Mustaine had a short private talk at a festival where both bands played. The details of that chat are still secret, but witnesses said it was friendly, which is a big change from the tense times they had talked in the past. It could have been a quiet ending to the story that began with a broken guitar in 1986. Both Araya and Mustaine have set their names in metal history today. In 2019, Slayer finished their farewell tour, marking the end of a nearly 40-year career that had an impact on many bands from different groups. Megadeth keeps recording and touring, and Mustaine is still the band's main creative force, even though the lineup has changed many times and he has had health problems, including a fight with throat cancer in 2019. Metal fans believe that the story of why rock bands wouldn't work with Dave Mustaine is an important part of the genre's history. It shows how personal conflicts can change the way music sounds, how ability and temperament are often in a state of uneasy balance, and how time can turn even the worst rivalries into minor details in a bigger story. Both artists are getting close to 60 years old, so the anger of their youth has been replaced by the wisdom of age. The broken guitar, the canceled partnership, and the years of not talking to each other have all become part of the story of thrash metal's troubled past. A history that neither Araya nor Mustaine could have dreamed when they were teenagers and first started playing their instruments. The best possible ending to their fight may have come from Araya himself. When asked in 2020 how he felt about Mustaine, he simply said, "At the start of something important. We are linked by that, whether we like it or not." For Tom Araya, Dave Mustaine, and the metal community that still talks about their difficult relationship, the bond they made through the creative explosion of thrash metal and the tests of human weakness is still their most lasting work together.